Welcome back. You're still watching news at Prime. So the Congress of the South African Trade Union has slammed what it labels as a shocking attack by business leadership South Africa's CEO Busi Mavuso on Transnet employees. In an interview with Newzroom Afrika, BLSA CEOs criticized the union's Transnet wage demands, describing it as an effort to undermine the country's economic recovery. Transnet and workers have reportedly reached a 3-year wage agreement that will see a 6% salary increase. Now, before we get a response from COSATU, let's have a listen to what it was that Mavuso had to say.
Honestly, as much as I place a lot of blame on the leadership of Transnet, but I even place a bigger blame to Misang on the unions. I really think that my biggest disquiet is really with the unions who are seemingly holding the country hostage with strike threats. Unions are showing complete disregard for the economic factors that affect us all. This is economic blackmail that we're experiencing here, and taxpayers are footing the bill while the economy suffers. It doesn't make sense to me, Sang, that Transnet or the unions would demand that Transnet gives double inflation increases in this environment where we know that Transnet cannot even afford to wipe its own nose.
Well, Matthew Parks, of course, the parliamentary coordinator for COSATU, joins us now. Matthew, good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. So some strong words that are being used there where Mavuso says unions holding the country hostage with strike threats and management caving into their demands without a fight. And then COSATU coming out with what I could argue is equally some strong words, saying they reject with utter disdain the BLSA CEO's shocking attack on Transnet employees. I mean, just talk to me about just some of the key issues that COSATU would want to raise around business leadership South Africa coming out. One would expect that this might be their perspective.
No, good evening, and thanks for having us. So look, number one is that we won't take kindly to anybody who attacks workers' rights, which are guaranteed in the Constitution, the right to form trade unions, the right to collective bargaining, the right to even withhold the labor if they're not satisfied. And it's quite amazing that the leader of BLSA, Business Leadership South Africa, which wants to extol the virtues of the Constitution and demand that the Constitution protect the rights of business owners, yet when it comes to workers, she actually incites government, calls upon government to break the trade unions at Transnet, to suppress the workers' rights to negotiate. And all that the workers at Transnet did was provided for in the law to engage in collective bargaining, to negotiate with employer for an increase, to protect the wages of their employees. That's it. It's a strange thing to now reciprocate to that and have this shrill call from BLSA to say, well, that's unacceptable. We have labor market stability precisely because we have a way for workers, for employers to resolve the issues around the negotiating table, to find some sort of middle ground to enable that workplace to be productive. And all the workers did at Transnet was simply say inflation last year, upon which wage negotiations are always conducted. They negotiate about the previous year's wage inflation rate. Inflation last year was 4.5%. So what they simply said is that, can you give us inflation plus 1.5%? That's hardly a crime against humanity. But also they take into account, as any wage negotiation does, that these are very poorly paid workers in most instances. And inflation tends to hit low-income workers, unlike the CEO of BLSA, the hardest. So electricity, transport, food, and so forth, those all exceeded far above the inflation rate. And of course, workers are not living in some sort of isolated paradise. They support relatives who don't have jobs. They support children who need to be assisted and so forth. They support unemployed family members and so on. And so it's a bit strange that this is now so offensive to them, to the BLSA. It's a fairly reasonable agreement. There was no strike. It was done quite quickly, amicably. It enables workers and Transnet to focus on the job at hand. We would have assumed that BLSA would be familiar with how a successful workplace operates. And that is one which values its workers as the most prized asset, which engages with them in good faith, resolves issues around the negotiating table, and sees how to boost productivity. But if we want to do what Ms. Mavuso seems to imply, go back to the dark days of apartheid where you pay workers peanuts, that's not a successful economic model because, one, workers won't be motivated. Two, they will struggle to pay for transport to get them to work. They'll struggle to pay for food, for healthcare to enable them to be productive. And of course, who exactly is going to buy the goods that our economy produces, businesses produce and want to sell, if workers are paid peanuts? So it's a strange thing, but we think the BLSA CEO should get off the high horse. We doubt very much she has declined a wage increase for the past year or any of the past years. We doubt that she gets less than inflation plus something. And I'm sure that if you look at what she earns, and I'm sure that look at the rest of the CEOs of her constituents earn, is far above what workers are earning. So we think it'd be more useful to actually say, what are the causes of transit difficulties? And it's not workers. The cause of transit difficulties are the international criminal syndicates who have stripped it of copper and other metals. It's the corruption which has permeated throughout Transnet. It's also the poorly negotiated train deals with China Railways, where there was a tax issue where services and spare parts are not provided for. Those are management issues. It's the underinvestment in infrastructure of the institution, it's the aging cranes. None of these issues workers have any control over. So we think for us, you want Transnet to be productive, which we do, and we've been pushing for as COSATU. Let's do the fundamental issues, but simply saying, let's dump the bill for state capture, for corruption, for mismanagement, for neglect upon the workers, the crane operators. That doesn't make sense. And that's not a successful business model to make in any stretch of the imagination.
I mean, Matthew, I'm obviously going to play devil's advocate here and put forward just some of the arguments that she really shares with us. So you talk about corruption and mismanagement, and those are really, reflective challenges of the past, but there certainly has to be a conversation around how Transnet needs to keep moving forward, and certainly how it improves its operational efficiencies, which is one of the arguments that she's put on the table, saying that, research shows that poor logistics performance in South Africa costs us 1 billion rand per day, and that is where the priority needs to be, putting resources into improving efficiencies. Now, does a wage increase guarantee that that is what we could see at Transnet? What does COSATU say about that?
So it's like basically almost putting a zebra next to the cart. There's a very separate issues. The issues affecting Transnet, for example, at the ports, the delays in getting containers off and onto boats is because we have aging cranes. So that's not a salary issue. That's not a work issue. That's because management hasn't bought new cranes, or the cranes they bought about a year ago are very old. It's about the cables which are being stripped at our railway network, which means trains must move slower, the signaling is not working, etc. Or it's about that they have a manual signaling system, manual scheduling system, as opposed to an IT-based one which can enable things to move much faster. Or it's about for years that the carriages that Transnet had bought from China, that because they could not resolve the issue of SARS, they couldn't get spare parts, they couldn't service many of these locomotives. So none of those are issues that workers are responsible for. But part of a successful enterprise, be it public or private, is a motivated employee. And part of that is to help workers to survive, to take care of their families, etc. One can pickpocket workers to one's heart's delight, often been done by the state, by the private sector employees. It doesn't result in anything. In fact, what it does is that you find those workers often have quite sought after skills like train drivers, engineers, mechanics, and so forth. They often leave to better paying jobs elsewhere in the private sector. So for us, and we've been pushing, we agree with Mavuso on one issue, that Transnet, like Eskom, is at the heart of our turnaround as an economy. An efficiently run Transnet is key to making sure mining, manufacturing, agricultural sectors can take off, can get their markers to their destinations on time, which generates tax revenue to fund the state. But to beat workers into the ground, that's not a solution. The solution is the cable theft, the maintenance of locomotives, the fixing of the railway network, the buying of new cranes, investing in IT capacity and all that. And of course, a motivated workforce is key to that. So I think for us, it's finding the right solution and not looking for a scapegoat. Yeah,
I want to go back to a point that you did touch on just a little bit at the beginning there and perhaps unpack it a little bit more. And I think it speaks to the discussion around the importance of protecting collective bargaining in South Africa, right? And why that is so critically important. But you've gone on as well in your statement to say a business leader with experience in creating and running successful enterprises would appreciate that staff are any workplace's most important asset. I'm reading there from COSATU's statement. But I want to stay at the issue of just how important collective bargaining is in South Africa and that incredibly important relationship.
It's key to turn around to the success of the economy. Of management of workers not able to sit around the negotiating table, or not able to resolve the issues, whether it's around a salary increase, whether it's around health and safety, whether it's around fields of job security, or even the productivity of the company. If you can't sit around and negotiate solution to those in a win-win way, then that company is not going to be successful. If you want to look at the consequences of labor market stability, we can look at some of the most painful strikes. For example, the ones that AMCU had done at Sibanye a few years ago, which went on for about 3 months or so, simply because management in the unions, the workers are not able to resolve the issues. So to ignore the views of the workplace, the workers, that doesn't help achieve anything. And to simply seek to disregard them, or in this case of Ms. Mavuso, to incite government to suppress workers' rights to collective bargaining, that's very, very worrying. That was done during the apartheid days. It's been done by many dictatorships around the world. It has no place in a constitutional democracy. And in fact, it's strange that the CEO of BLSA is not aware that the Constitution actually spells out workers have the right to collective bargaining, to unionize, to withhold the labor, etc. It's up to management to say, look, we can't afford this offer, we'll come with a different offer. But the fact is management did the calculations, they felt they could afford it, they felt it made sense to reach a 3-year agreement, which also is good for Transnet as well, because it enables Transnet then to focus for the next 3 years on its productivity issues, how to boost it. It gives space to strengthen relations between the workers and management, to look at other issues which might help boost the wages of workers and help them lessen demands for increases. So, for example, they could look at the issue of medical aid, pensions, etc. But it enables workers in the company to focus on productivity and not to be involved in a standoff which never works out well for anybody.
Yeah. Matthew, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, though. Matthew Parks, of course, a parliamentary coordinator there for COSATU. Right.